A black man who suffered from a mental condition that interfered with his cognitive effectiveness was taking a shower when the police tased him 18 times, which unfortunately ended his life.
Tanisha Anderson, a 37-year-old black woman who had a heart condition and a bipolar disorder, was pinned down by law enforcement, causing her to suffocate and die.
Charlie McGillery, a man with brain injuries, was killed by police officers because he was not able to answer the questions given by them.
All these people had two main similarities. They all suffered from a disability and were killed by law enforcement. For many years, people who suffer from a disability have constantly been a recurring target for police officers. An article written by Susan Meisner, the creator of American Civil Liberties Union program, concludes that in 2018 alone, police have shot and killed 64 people with mental health disabilities. This article was published in March of 2018, so that means within 3 months into the year, 64 people with a disability had already been killed. Many factors play a role as to why the police are continuously targeting people who suffer from a disability. Looking at the economic, political, cultural, and ethical effects and an outcome of the problem helps shed a little light on enormous discrepancy in the system.
For starters, a person who has a disability does not always have the ability to understand or follow directions of a police officer. This is stated in an article by S.E. Smith, where it concludes that a huge range of impairments may interfere with someone's ability to understand and comply with requests from police in even the most optimal of circumstances, including deafness, blindness, and mobility impairments, along with cognitive, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. Ethan Saylor, a man with Down syndrome, lost his life because he could not follow directions after watching a movie. An employee told him he had to leave or buy another ticket, but Saylor refused. So police officers were called to handle the situation. They pinned him face down to the ground, and he asphyxiated. If Saylor was able to properly follow directions, he would have never died. But the problem is his disability prevents him from doing so.
Also, in an article written by David M. Perry, a freelance journalist focused on disability, explains the story of a 35-year-old Latino man who was tased and shot by 2 officers after not responding to verbal commands. While sitting on his porch with a metal pipe in his hands. Being deaf is a physical disability and limits deaf people in one area, not being able to respond to verbal commands. If the situation was flipped and Maggio could hear, his life could have been spared because his reaction of noncompliance would have been overturned to a more immediate response of putting the metal pipe down.
Next, current police officers are trained to react to situations in a fast-paced manner. But when it comes to reacting to situations involving a person who has a disability, officers are going to have to take the situation slower.
Implicit bias has affected the way police officers interact with people who have disabilities. Through the words of David Perry, he claimed that a major problem police officers have is that they misunderstand and criminalize disability. This causes officers to react quickly when interacting with people who have a disability, which leads to death and violence.
The Americans with Disabilities Act, enacted in the 1990s, is a civil rights law which prohibits discrimination against both physical and mental disabilities. An article written by David M. Perry and Lawrence Carter Long, a public affairs specialist for the National Council of Disability, explains the story. In 2008, Antonio Love was feeling sick and rushed into a nearby restroom. After he was in there for quite a while, law enforcement was called by a store manager. When officers arrived, they received no response from knocking on the door, they approached by taking down the door and tasering Love. However, Love was deaf. Not all disabilities are visible to the human eye. The officers should have used more precaution when coming in contact with Love, but instead they're often lethal. Command and control culture overpower their better judgment, leading to a more catastrophic results.
Although this result could be prevented, officers receive little to no funding available for programs for officers to receive this kind of training. Samantha Dorm, a reviewer for federal agencies, released a report in 2017 of everything that was going to be federally funded in 2018. In that report, organizations and programs such as Office on Violence Against Women, State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, and multiple programs to reduce opioid abuse were going to be funded with millions of dollars. With more and more people who suffer from a disability dying in the hands of police officers, it is becoming a major problem and therefore should have federal funding go to fixing the issue.
Perhaps most significantly, police brutality against African Americans and Latinos in the United States has been in the public eye the past few years, but harassment against minorities who have a disability is equally as important. In another article written by S.E. Smith, she gives an example of 3 men, Keith Lamont Scott, Alfred Alongo, and Reginald Thomas, who all had three things in common. They were black, disabled, and killed by law enforcement. The death of these 3 mentally unstable minority men not only added them to the ever-growing list of innocent African Americans murdered at the hands of police, but also disabled people whose deaths by law enforcement are most recently rising all over the nation. The fact of the matter is, people are targeted because of the biases surrounding the color of their skin and killed by the excuse of their disability. In other words, police officers punish people who have a difficult altercation more strenuously, based on the bias they have surrounding the person's racial background.
Referring back to the article by David and Perry, he concludes that most of these people, especially in cases where police clearly misuse lethal force, turn out to also be marginalized by race, class, gender orientation, or other factors that intensify vulnerability. This means that a person's race, class, or gender do in fact play a part in situations involving police officers.
An incident that happened on August 4th of 2015, captured on video by a journalist, Chartier LeBerry, showing San Francisco police officers taking down a homeless black man. According to the witness, police were called to the scene because there was a suspicious man waving some sticks around. When they arrived, they took down the disabled man and got no response, and he responded those were his crutches. Looking at the video, it shows unnecessary force used by police to continuously pin the disabled man down as he struggles to move. Even after the officers realized the man had a prosthetic leg, they continued using overwhelming restraint on him, forcing his head to the ground. The officers purposely used their authority to punish and mistreat a black man in a situation which could have easily been steered away from the beating of an innocent black man living with a physical disability. Finally, given the issue listed above, my group has come up with the following 3 possible solutions. Our first solution: people who have a disability should carry an identification card that would allow officers to know what disability they have. Our second: changing the mindset and culture of police officers from warrior to guardian. Our third: having training programs for police officers to have intentional interactions with people who have a disability to help teach them how to handle interactions with them.
The first possible solution is ineffective because it puts the responsibility on the people who have the disability. When wearing Rigato, a police officer explained how he almost shot a deaf suspect who he thought was reaching for a gun when he was actually reaching for a card that identified he was deaf.
The second possible solution is changing the mindset of police by changing the culture of police. For example, in an article written by Stephen K. Rice, a professor at the University of Seattle, it is concluded that in some communities, the friendly neighborhood beat cop community guardian has been replaced with the urban warrior trained with the accoutrements and weaponry of modern warfare. When officers enter the work field with the mentality and equipment of a warrior rather than a guardian, it often leads them to take drastic measures. Furthermore, the warrior mentality will cause more death and violence to a situation, rather than de-escalating it in a proper manner that is respectful to the life of the accused.
The third and final solution, which is also the most effective, is to integrate police officers with people who have a disability, which will provide more understanding of certain disabilities. For example, in an article written by Meg Anderson, an NPR journalist in Washington, D.C., it is mentioned that police officers are being trained by people who have a disability with improv in Maryland. This includes, but is not limited to, violent encounters, interactions requiring patience and being sensitive and cautious of different disabilities in different situations. And another article explaining the same solution published by Virginia Commonwealth University, this training is proving beneficial. The article concludes that officers stand to benefit greatly from the training, since their job involves responding very rapidly to a variety of situations, which they may not understand fully. The training encourages them to focus on public safety and health. This proves that out of all 3 solutions, this one is the most effective because in the end it puts the responsibility on the police officer and helps to eliminate the implicit bias, as the police officers will work with many people from different cultures.
If this solution was implicated in all 50 states, then the power of teaching law enforcement how to properly handle interactions with people who have a disability would impact our society greatly. Essentially, this creates a balance of power between law enforcement and people who live with a disability.
Zahra, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
Can you repeat that?
In what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
Working as a group, we came to like a great topic, which had very great evidence behind it that overall helped our presentation.
Right. Ruweyda, having finished your project, what, if anything, do you consider to be a gap in your team's research that, if addressed, would make you feel more confident about your conclusion?
Okay, we were talking about this the other day, but I wish we could have included something about how police officers can identify somebody who has a disability in the work field. Because they can't, like, it's kind of considered rude to go up to the person and just blatantly ask if they have the disability. So if we could have included that somewhere in our presentation, I feel like I would have been more comfortable with our conclusion.
Erica, give one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of learning about Ruweyda's findings.
So Ruweyda's findings, she had that when someone is a minority, they're more at risk, and that changed her thinking because I never thought about that. And when we started looking at the evidence after reading her paper and making the presentation, that it made me realize that they really do have a more increased risk of dying when they come into contact with police officers.
Okay. Malath, what is an example of a compelling argument from a peer's individual report that you decided to exclude from your presentation, and why?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. What is an example of a compelling argument from a peer's individual report that you decided to that your group decided to exclude from your presentation, and why?
One compelling argument was that EMTs and other people can be the first responders to people who have a mental health crisis, or when people with disabilities need help, instead of a police officer helping or like being the first responder to the situation to prevent to prevent violence and death.